Who was the angel who stood at Sodom and Gomorrah, wielding judgment like fire and mercy like a whisper? The Bible's story hides more than a tale of wrath. It hides a riddle at the heart of the divine. Was this being merely a messenger, or the very presence of God in a form humanity could not bear to name? The truth is more disturbing than the storybooks reveal. In the ashes of those ruined cities stands a figure who is not just an angel, but the veiled embodiment of divine authority, an appearance so close to the throne that ancient voices trembled to describe it. What if the angel at Sodom was not just an envoy, but the face of God's own justice and grace? In the breathless hush of the noonday heat, when the world of sand and stone shimmered in silence beneath a blazing sky, Abraham sat at the entrance of his tent among the ancient oaks of Mamre, a man marked by covenant, by waiting, by the secret weight of promised things. The world had grown still, as if all of creation held its breath, when suddenly he looked up and beheld three figures drawing near through the haze. There was something about their movement that defied the ordinary, something too steady, too purposeful, too radiant for wandering Bedouins or desert merchants. A holy fear stirred in Abraham's spirit, an intuition as deep as memory that he was about to meet visitors not born of earth. Without hesitation, the patriarch, though old and weary, rose and ran toward them, bowing himself to the ground in reverence, the dust of the wilderness clinging to his robe. "My Lord," he implored, "if I have found favor in your eyes, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet and rest under the tree. Let me bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves. After that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." The words tumbled from his lips, not as mere hospitality, but as a sacred offering, for in the presence of the mysterious, the soul seeks to give everything. The three agreed, and so Abraham hurried to Sarah, instructing her to knead fine flour and bake fresh bread, and he chose a tender calf, which a servant prepared with speed and skill. Curds and milk, bread and roasted meat were set before them beneath the broad ancient branches that had witnessed generations pass in dust and hope. As Abraham stood nearby, a servant before these guests whose very silence brimmed with unspeakable meaning, the air trembled with a sense of expectancy. Then one spoke, a voice at once gentle and terrible, echoing through Abraham's bones like the memory of thunder. "Where is Sarah, your wife?" Abraham answered. "She is in the tent," the visitor declared. "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." Inside the tent, Sarah heard and laughed silently to herself, her heart battered by long years of waiting and disappointment. But the visitor, who saw all things, who read the secret thoughts of mortal hearts, said, "Why did Sarah laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord?" A chill of awe ran through Abraham. This was no ordinary traveler, no passing messenger, but one who spoke with the knowledge and authority of the Most High. The promise hung in the air, weighty and alive, and then, as quickly as the gentle laughter of hope faded, the conversation turned, like the wind shifting before a storm. The men rose, and Abraham walked with them, as one walks with kings, toward the hills that gazed across the valley to Sodom. There, amid the trembling silence, the visitor spoke again, not to Abraham, but as if before the assembly of heaven itself. "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do?" The other two, veiled in mystery but bearing the gravity of the divine, awaited the decree. The first visitor continued, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin very grave. I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me." The words were not only report, but judgment pronounced with the certainty of the ancient hills. Abraham's heart pounded, for he knew these cities, their wealth, their violence, their festering corruption, and he knew that Lot, his beloved nephew, lived among them. But deeper still, Abraham knew he was standing in the presence of the one who searches hearts and reigns over destinies. The visitor's eyes, if eyes they could be called, held the fire of creation and the sorrow of the flood. This was not merely an angel, Abraham realized. This was an emissary clothed in eternity, a bearer of both promise and warning, whose every word resonated with the secret music of the universe. Under the ancient oaks, promise and judgment intertwined like light and shadow, and the world seemed to hang poised between mercy and wrath. Abraham's journey with these visitors had begun with humble bread and water, but by the time the meal was finished and the conversation drifted toward the fate of Sodom, he found himself swept up in a cosmic drama whose boundaries stretched from earth to heaven. This was not only the visitation of angels, it was an encounter with the threshold of the divine, where the Holy One of Israel walked veiled in mortal form, and the future of nations trembled in a single word. As the shadows lengthened across the plain, and the heat of the day softened to the hush of evening, Abraham lingered in the trembling presence of his guests, a holy restlessness rising within him. The revelation of coming judgment upon Sodom and Gomorrah burned in his mind, a judgment as inevitable as the sunrise and as terrible. Yet it was not only the cities that weighed upon him, but the fate of Lot, his own blood, and the innocent who might dwell unknowing amid the corruption. The two companions turned and began to walk toward the city in the valley below, but Abraham stood still before the third, the one whose words held the thunder of Sinai and the tenderness of Eden, whose gaze seemed to pierce time itself. Something deeper than fear compelled Abraham, a wild, reverent courage, and he stepped forward, voice trembling but determined. "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked?" he asked, the words hanging fragile between heaven and earth. "Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep it away and not spare the place for the 50 righteous who are in it?" In that moment, Abraham felt the weight of standing between the wrath of God and the desperate need of humanity. The visitor's face, radiant with an authority that needed no proof, softened with a compassion that was older than creation. "If I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city," he replied, "I will spare the whole place for their sake." The words settled like dew, heavy and miraculous. But Abraham, emboldened by mercy and yet deeply aware of his own insignificance, pressed further. "Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? Again, the answer flowed, not impatient, not dismissive, but patient and fierce as a father's love. "I will not destroy it if I find 45 there." Abraham's heart raced, for each response revealed not only a judge but a redeemer, a God whose justice is inseparable from his mercy. "Suppose 40 are found there," Abraham ventured, breathless at the edge of the unthinkable. "For the sake of 40, I will not do it," came the reply, unwavering. "Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there." With each reduction, Abraham felt the chasm between the holiness of the visitor and the brokenness of the cities, yet also a mysterious nearness, a divine willingness to bend toward mercy, as if the heart of God ached to rescue more than to destroy. "I will not do it if I find 30 there." Still, Abraham could not stop, for Lot's face lingered in his mind, and the hope for just a remnant, a handful who might yet redeem the multitude, spurred him on. "Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it." The sky above darkened to deep indigo, and the first stars blinked awake, as if the entire cosmos were listening to this impossible negotiation, a mortal pleading with the infinite, the dust daring to argue with the wind. One last time, Abraham bowed low, his voice nearly a whisper, a final prayer trembling on his lips. "Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again but this once. Suppose 10 are found there." The answer came, resolute and unchanging. "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." In that instant, Abraham knew he was no longer speaking merely to an angel, no messenger or subordinate, but the very judge of all the earth, whose authority to condemn is matched only by his power to forgive. In this sacred exchange, Abraham glimpsed the mysterious tension at the heart of the divine, a justice that cannot overlook evil, and a mercy that searches tirelessly for even the smallest reason to withhold wrath. The conversation ended not with fanfare, but with the solemnity of destiny fulfilled. The Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. Yet, in the echo of that final answer, Abraham understood. Mercy is not weakness, and judgment is not cruelty. In the hidden places of eternity, they are one, and at their intersection, the fate of cities and the fate of the world hangs trembling in the hands of the holy. As the sun slipped beneath the horizon and the plains darkened into a landscape of gathering shadow, the two remaining visitors, those who had stood beside the one who spoke with the authority of eternity, walked toward the gates of Sodom. The wind carried the scent of dust and decay, and the distant echoes of revelry drifted through the streets as lamps flickered to life in a city steeped in corruption. No watchman hailed them, no elder welcomed them. Instead, as they passed through the entrance, eyes followed with predatory intent, and whispers rose like the hiss of serpents in tall grass. The visitors walked calmly, untouched by fear, their steps steady and deliberate, for they needed no protection from men. Yet, they knew what Abraham could not. The measure of wickedness had reached its fullness, and the outcry that rose to heaven was not a rumor, but a wound. In the midst of this festering darkness, a single righteous man recognized the danger. Lot, seated at the gate, rose swiftly when he saw the strangers, for unlike the people of his adopted city, he still bore the memory of Abraham's ways and the echo of holiness in his heart. He bowed before them and implored, "My lords, turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night. Wash your feet, then you may rise early and go on your way." The visitors replied with a simple refusal, "We will spend the night in the town square." But Lot knew Sodom better than they knew the forests of heaven. His heart seized with dread. No one stayed safely in the square after dark. No traveler passed unmolested through these streets. No guest was shown kindness except by force of determination. Lot insisted with desperate urgency, pressing them with the fervor of a man who understood the stakes. At last, they consented, entering his home where he prepared a meal of unleavened bread, the same bread eaten in haste by those on the brink of deliverance or doom. For a brief moment, a fragile peace settled over the house, but peace in Sodom was only the calm before the storm. Before they could retire, a rising roar swelled outside. The men of the city, young and old from every district, encircled Lot's home like wolves. Fists pounded on the door, voices thick with wicked desire snarled, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them." The air vibrated with monstrous hunger, violence disguised as appetite, depravity masquerading as power. Lot's heart nearly failed within him, yet he stepped outside, shutting the door firmly behind him, the barrier between innocence and atrocity trembling under his palm. "I beg you, my brothers," he pleaded, "do not act so wickedly." But Sodom had no brothers, only predators. They jeered, they threatened, they lunged forward. Lot's voice cracked with despair as he reasoned, bargained, pleaded, but their ears were closed, their hearts calcified by years of sin left unchallenged. What Abraham had feared was unfolding with terrible precision. The people of Sodom did not merely sin, they celebrated corruption, enforced it, demanded it. To them, righteousness was an insult and purity a threat. As Lot stood pressed against the door, trembling under the weight of their rage, a sudden hand reached from inside, pulled him backward with supernatural strength, and the door slammed shut behind him. Then came a moment that ripped through the night like lightning. A burst of brilliance, too fast for the eye to follow, too pure for darkness to resist, flashed through the sealed doorframe. The mob recoiled, screaming as their sight vanished. Blindness fell upon them like judgment incarnate, scattering them in confusion, their hands clawing the walls, their voices shrieking through the streets. They groped for the door that moments before they had pounded with arrogance, now helpless and undone. Inside, the visitors stood revealed in the faint glow of lamplight, no longer veiled as mere travelers. Their presence filled the room with a weight that made even the walls tremble. They turned to Lot with words that cut through all remaining illusions. "Have you anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of this place, for we are about to destroy it, because the outcry against its people has grown great before the Lord, and he has sent us to destroy it." Lot felt the breath leave his lungs. Though he had known evil, he had not known how near its end stood. He rushed to his sons-in-law, urging them to flee, but they laughed, thinking he jested, as though a man could joke with the end of the world. When he returned, shaken and hollow, dawn had not yet broken, but the visitor's urgency sharpened to a blade. They gripped him, his wife and his 2 daughters by the hands, the grasp of beings who needed no permission to save a life. "Arise," they commanded, "take your family, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." Lot hesitated, not out of disbelief but out of grief for all he had gained and lost in Sodom. But the angels would not allow hesitation to become death. They pulled the family through the door, into the cool darkness of pre-dawn, as the cries of the blind mob still echoed through the streets like ghosts. The weight of judgment thickened the air. Every star above seemed dimmed, as if heaven itself braced for what was to come. The angels led them beyond the city walls, their steps swift and unrelenting. Once they reached the outskirts, one spoke with the solemnity of a decree carved into eternity. "Escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away." And in those words, Lot finally understood. The mercy shown to him was not a postponement of wrath. It was a narrow door opened by grace alone. Behind him, Sodom groaned like a beast awaiting slaughter. Ahead of him stretched a night that held both promise and terror. Judgment had not yet fallen, but its footsteps approached with the inevitability of a rising storm. And as Lot fled into the darkness, the angels remained behind for a moment longer, standing between the trembling earth and the fire, coiled in the hand of God, ready to unleash the judgment spoken beneath the oaks of Mamre, judgment that would turn a valley of sin into an everlasting monument of divine justice. Before the first blush of dawn crested over the jagged hills, the sky above Sodom was still draped in the deep indigo of night, a world suspended in the final hush before judgment. Lot and his family lingered, trembling on the edge of the city that had been their home, every heartbeat a painful reminder of the ties they were about to sever. Inside the city's gates, a power far older than Sodom itself gathered in silence, a presence so profound that even the shadows seemed to draw back in awe. And it was then, as the last star flickered on the western horizon, that the true identity of the leading visitor broke forth like the sound of a trumpet at the world's end. He stood before Lot, not merely as a messenger, not as one angel among many, but as the very threshold of the holy, clothed in the form of a servant, yet radiating the gravity of eternity. His voice, when it came, was neither loud nor thunderous, yet it parted the darkness with a certainty that could shatter mountains. "Escape for your life," he commanded, every syllable ringing with authority that belonged to the Ancient of Days. "Do not look back, nor stop anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be swept away." Lot faltered, anxiety clouding his face, for he saw the vastness of the hills and the nearness of the storm. "Oh no, my lord," he pleaded. "Your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there, is it not a little one, and my life will be saved." The visitor looked upon Lot not with impatience, but with a forbearance that bore the weight of infinite patience. "Behold, I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. But hurry, escape there, for I can do nothing until you arrive there." With those words, the terrifying clarity of the moment settled on Lot like a mantle of cold fire. This was not an angel who came only to carry messages. This was the angel of the Lord, the mysterious figure who would later appear to Hagar in the wilderness, who would speak to Moses from the burning bush and declare, "I am who I am." This was the one in whom the name and presence of God himself resided, the one who moves when the throne moves, whose voice is the very sound of the divine decree. Ancient tradition recognized him as the angel of the presence, the veiled manifestation of the Most High, the bridge between the unseeable glory and the trembling earth. The urgency in his command was not impatience, but the unstoppable momentum of justice held in check only by the demands of mercy. "I cannot act until you are safe," he declared, as if all the powers of heaven waited upon the footsteps of a single rescued family. His words were not merely advice, they were law, the decree of the one whose authority is as absolute in grace as it is in judgment. In that moment, Lot realized that the deliverance offered to him was not the work of some distant, impersonal force, but the direct intervention of the living God who walks among men in the hour of crisis. He was confronted not only by the terror of judgment, but by the awesome intimacy of divine care, a care that lingered for one family even as it prepared to sweep away the wickedness of entire cities. Outside, the world held its breath. The angel stood as a sentinel between the wrath above and the remnant below, a living shield whose authority bound the very elements. Lot and his daughters fled into the dim morning, their steps hastened by the angel's unwavering command. Behind them, the angel of the Lord remained, not as a spectator, but as the executor of the decree. In his presence, the ordinary became holy ground. The same feet that now pressed the earth outside Sodom had once walked Eden's garden in the cool of the day. The same voice that now told Lot to run had once called Abraham to rise and go, had once thundered from the bush of flame, had once whispered comfort to the forsaken. Now, in the valley of Sodom, this being, the mysterious intersection of God's mercy and God's wrath, prepared to act with a power that belonged only to the throne. And yet, he waited. Judgment could not fall until grace had finished its work, until every righteous soul had passed beyond the reach of destruction. The angel's patience was not hesitation, but purpose, a window of mercy, a living testimony that the justice of God never tramples the innocent, that every decree is shaped by the hand of compassion. In the trembling space between night and fire, the angel of the Lord was revealed not only as the judge, but as the deliverer, the God who stands beside his people in the hour of unspeakable peril. And so, before the first ember rose, before the sky split open in wrath, the earth witnessed a miracle more profound than fire, a God who waits, whose glory stands guard until the last child of mercy has been led out by the hand. If this story has opened your eyes, if the presence of the living God has stirred something in your spirit, let your voice be heard. Like, comment, and share. Subscribe to the channel, and if you wish to bless the channel, consider clicking the Super Thanks button or becoming a member. Every act of support fuels the research and ministry that brings these ancient truths to light. As the dawn broke over the ruins of human pride, the angel turned his gaze toward heaven, and the hour of reckoning began. As the first faint glow of morning touched the barren ridges above the valley, Lot and his daughters climbed the rocky path to Zoar, breathless and haunted, while behind them, the world they had known teetered on the edge of annihilation. The air grew heavy, charged with a tension more ancient than the hills, and the sky itself seemed to withhold its light as if recoiling from the horror about to unfold. In Sodom, the streets were hushed at last, not by peace, but by the confusion of those struck blind and the dread that crept like fog through every alley. And then, with no further warning, the line between night and day was shattered. From above, a deluge of fire and burning sulfur tore through the heavens, descending not as some random catastrophe, but as the unerring judgment of the Almighty. The angel of the Lord, the one who had tarried on the edge of mercy until Lot was safe, now stretched forth his hand and released the fury that had long been restrained. It was not the impersonal rage of nature, but the calculated answer to centuries of violence, cruelty, and defiance that had saturated the very soil of Sodom and Gomorrah. The fire fell with a violence that shook the foundations of the earth, consuming stone, timber, flesh, and memory alike. In a single hour, mighty cities that had boasted of their power and wealth became a wasteland of smoking ash, their towers and temples erased, their laughter and arrogance silenced forever. The cries of the doomed rose only for a moment before being swallowed by the roar of judgment, and soon only silence remained, save for the hissing of embers and the distant weeping of the wind. From the heights above, Lot saw the spectacle he could never have imagined, the plain that once gleamed with gardens and vineyards, now writhing under a cloud of wrath. His heart ached with unspeakable grief, not only for the loss of his home and kin, but for the knowledge that mercy had drawn its line so thin and so few had crossed over into deliverance. His wife, looking back with longing for what could not be reclaimed, became a pillar of salt, a witness to the peril of divided loyalty when salvation calls. Yet, even in the midst of total ruin, a thread of hope wound through the smoke. Lot and his daughters, trembling fugitives on a mountainside, were alive not because of their own righteousness, but because of a grace that had sought them, seized them, and borne them away at the last possible moment. It was the angel of the Lord who had closed the door on evil, who had shielded the house with blinding power, who had waited on the plain with patience deeper than the abyss, who had declared, "I cannot act until you are safe." Here, judgment and mercy collided in one single unfathomable act. The same voice that summoned the flames had also uttered the words of warning. The same hand that poured out destruction had also grasped trembling mortals and led them out of darkness. It was a paradox older than time, that the one with power to destroy also longs to redeem. That divine wrath is not a contradiction of love, but its fiercest defense against evil. The ruins of Sodom became the world's most dreadful altar, an offering of sin consumed in the fire of holiness, and yet, beside the ashes, a remnant survived. Proof that even in judgment, God remembers mercy. As the day grew bright and the valley smoldered beneath a shroud of sulphurous cloud, the question hung heavy in the heart of every witness and every reader. Who is this being who stands between ruin and rescue, whose word can reduce empires to nothing and yet spare a single undeserving soul? The angel of the Lord is more than a messenger. He is the threshold where the justice of the Almighty meets the compassion of the Redeemer, the living embodiment of both the terror and the hope at the center of God's heart. In the ruins, the silence became a voice of its own, whispering to every generation that follows. The judge is also the deliverer, and where his fire falls, his mercy lingers for those who will be led out by the hand. Through the drifting smoke and silence of Sodom's grave, a mystery echoed louder than the thunder that had just passed, a secret not only of destruction, but of presence, of the one who had walked the scorched streets and stood in the very center of judgment and mercy. From the ancient world, whispers arise in scripture and tradition, carrying hints too powerful, too unsettling for most to bear in the daylight. The angel who visited Abraham beneath the oaks of Mamre, who conversed as the Lord, and yet appeared in the form of a man. The same angel who dined, who judged, who waited, and who rescued. He was not merely an envoy dispatched from a far-off throne. He was not a subordinate or even a prince among the heavenly host. Hidden in the narrative is the forbidden secret. This was the angel of the Lord, the angel of the presence, the one who carried not only a message, but the very name and authority of Yahweh himself. When Abraham bargained for the souls of Sodom, he stood before a figure whose every answer throbbed with both sovereign patience and terrifying finality. When Lot hesitated at the edge of doom, it was this same angel who declared, "I can do nothing until you are safe," as if the entire universe paused to wait for the will of this one. Jewish sages and early Christian theologians, poring over the cryptic grammar and strange scenes of Genesis, began to perceive that the angel who spoke as God and accepted worship, who forgave and commanded, was not like Gabriel, not like Michael, but veiled deity himself, an early mysterious appearing of the Word who would later walk among men as Jesus. He is the same presence that blazed in the burning bush, who later thundered on Sinai, the same who appeared to Hagar in her weeping, to Joshua as the commander of the Lord's army, and to Manoah's wife as the bearer of promised birth. The scriptures whisper in Exodus 23 that God would send an angel ahead of his people, one in whom his very name would dwell, a being who would not pardon rebellion because his authority was absolute, yet who bore the tenderness to save. Isaiah called him the angel of his presence, and in Judges he is the Wonderful, a title reserved for the coming Messiah. To gaze on him was to look on God through a veil, to encounter the unspeakable in a form the world could scarcely survive. The story of Sodom, therefore, is not merely the tale of cities consumed by fire or of one man's rescue from destruction. It is the unveiling of the greatest paradox in Scripture, that the God who sits enthroned above the heavens also steps down to stand in the dust and ashes with his creation, that the judge who decrees the end also lingers to draw the undeserving into safety, that when judgment descends, the heart of God is never far away, but is present, veiled, waiting, leading. The forbidden secret of the angel at Sodom is that he is the threshold, standing between the consuming fire and the last hope of escape, embodying both the relentless justice that cannot overlook evil and the relentless mercy that will not abandon even a single soul who dares to take his hand. In that hour, the face of God drew nearer to the world than any dared imagine, shrouded in mystery yet burning with holy love. And it is this same presence who still walks among the ruins and the promises, calling out to every generation. When the world trembles on the edge of judgment, the God who saves is nearer than your breath, waiting not only to judge, but to lead you through the fire and to reveal in the end the secret that redeems every story, God with us even in the ashes. Before you go, if this revelation has moved your heart, if these ancient mysteries have drawn you nearer to the truth of God's unfailing presence and love, we invite you to stand with us. Like, comment, and share this message so that more may encounter the God who is both judge and redeemer. Subscribe to Bible Uncharted, and if you feel led to support our mission of uncovering the hidden riches of Scripture, consider clicking the Super Thanks button or become a member. Together, we can continue to invest in research, storytelling, and teaching that makes the wonders of the Word accessible to every seeking heart. The angel who appeared at Sodom still walks the pages of history, and perhaps even now walks beside you.